Next, Nicky McHale will be questioned by David McLaughlin, KC. He says he will now cross-examine the witness for the prosecution. He says it is accepted he went to Miura Wines and bought 6 cans of full-fat Coke. Mr. McLaughlin asks, "Did you go with Coyley?" "I don't know who Coyley is," says Nicky McHale. He says he went with Craig Bryan and does not know Craig Bryan's having a nickname. Mr. McLaughlin asks, "Why are you here, Mr. McHale?" "Because I know Thomas Cashman is innocent," says Nicky McHale. "Were you put up to being here?" asks Mr. McLaughlin. "I'm not, no," says Nicky McHale. At that time, the court has a break, and when they return, Mr. McLaughlin continues. He says, "Didn't somebody else knock at your door before Thomas Cashman after the match?" "I was having a cigarette," says Nicky McHale. "I'm going to suggest it was Craig Bryan," says Mr. McLaughlin. "Just after, yeah. I had a cigarette around 5 to 10 o'clock. I was talking. I see Craig Bryan and Thomas Cashman over the road. Then I went back in," says Nicky McHale. "Craig Bryan wasn't with Thomas Cashman then, was he?" says Mr. McLaughlin. "Yes, he was," says Nicky McHale. "That's a lie," says Mr. McLaughlin. "No, it's not," says Nicky McHale. "Didn't Craig Bryan knock on your door and ask to be taken somewhere by you?" says Mr. McLaughlin. "He normally just lets himself in," says Nicky McHale. "Do you recall him saying, 'Can you take me somewhere?' says Mr. McLaughlin. "That's correct," says Nicky McHale. "You said no, and your mate took him," says Mr. McLaughlin. "That's correct," says Nicky McHale. "He had a bag. Could you smell cannabis from the bag?" says Mr. McLaughlin. "Not that I could smell, no. I believed it was money," says Nicky McHale. "He asked you for a lift and you say no. You asked your mate, 'Listen, Paul, can you take Craig?' says Mr. McLaughlin. "Craig asked him," says Nicky McHale. "Did he tell you where he was going?" says Mr. McLaughlin. "No," says Nicky McHale. "Have you any idea where he wanted to go?" says Mr. McLaughlin. "No," says Nicky McHale. "Did Paul McCarthy take him? What time?" asks Mr. McLaughlin. "Just after 10. Roughly around 5 past, says Nicky McHale. "There's no Thomas Cashman, is there, Mr. McHale?" asks Mr. McLaughlin. "I don't understand," says Nicky McHale. "At that time, there's no Thomas Cashman at the scene," says Mr. McLaughlin. "He's over the road," says Nicky McHale. "You can see he's with you," says Mr. McLaughlin. "I'm here telling the truth," says Nicky McHale. "How long did it take Paul McCarthy to come back?" asked Mr. McLaughlin. "Roughly 30 minutes, 35 minutes, says Nicky McHale. "Paul McCarthy has left your house just after 10, 5 past 10, says Mr. McLaughlin. "That's correct," says Nicky McHale. "Paul McCarthy is back with Craig Bryan about 20 to 11, says Mr. McLaughlin. "Yeah, about 25 to, yeah, around that time," says Nicky McHale. "Without the bag?" says Mr. McLaughlin. "Without the bag, yes," says Nicky McHale. "Did he say it's all kicking off?" says Mr. McLaughlin. "Paul McCarthy made me aware of it. He said there's a lot of police presence about," says Nicky McHale. "Did that spook you?" says Mr. McLaughlin. "It never spooked me, no," says Nicky McHale. "You'd done nothing wrong, had you?" says Mr. McLaughlin. "No," says Nicky McHale. "Did you want to drive at that time?" says Mr. McLaughlin. "No, because there was loads of police presence," says Nicky McHale. "What did you do?" says Mr. McLaughlin. "I went down and drove the van," says Nicky McHale. "What direction did you go in?" asked Mr. McLaughlin. "Towards Finch Lane shops," says Nicky McHale. "Towards the noise of the sirens and the police," says Mr. McLaughlin. "It's about a 5-minute drive. Not even minutes. 2 minutes to the shop," says Nicky McHale. "Why is it you say you don't want to go out because the sirens are on, and then the next sentence, you're going towards the shop?" says Mr. McLaughlin. "I knew Craig Bryan had money. I didn't have a licence. I didn't want to drive around with a load of money," says Nicholas McHale. Are you telling the truth? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. I am, yes, says Nicky McHale. Or are you trying to bail him out? And Mr. McLaughlin then points at Thomas Cashman. I'm telling the truth, says Nicky McHale. Your mate? Has he put you up to it? Says Mr. McLaughlin. He hasn't, no, says Nicky McHale. Is he a big-time drug dealer? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. He's known in the area as a big-time drug dealer, says Nicholas McHale. Do you know Danny from Fincham? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. No, says Nicky McHale. Do you know Lenny from Ruscombe? Says Mr. McLaughlin. Yes, says Nicky McHale. Tell us a bit about him, says Mr. McLaughlin. I'd rather not, says Nicky McHale. What does he do? Says Mr. McLaughlin. I think he works on building sites. That's all I know, says Nicky McHale. Do you deliver drugs for Mr. Cashman? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. Cashman supplied me with cannabis, yeah, says Nicky McHale. Do you deliver drugs for him? Says Mr. McLaughlin. No, says Nicky McHale. Do you know any of his regular people who he delivers cannabis to in the area? Says Mr. McLaughlin. Yeah, says Nicky McHale. I don't suppose you can tell us who they are, says Mr. McLaughlin. I know Kevin, says Nicky McHale. Is he a drug dealer? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. No, says Nicky McHale. You know what goes on in Dovecot. How is it? Asked Mr. You know what goes on in Dovecot. How is it? Says Mr. McLaughlin. It's a rough place, yeah, says Nicky McHale. There are drugs there? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. There's drugs in Dovecot, yeah, says Nicky McHale. Is he the main man on the cannabis round? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I just know he's a big drug dealer and he can get loads of drugs like cannabis, says Nicky McHale. Did you read that in the Echo? Says Mr. McLaughlin. No, says Nicky McHale. Have you been asked these questions before? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. No, says Nicky McHale. Have you been interviewed by the police in this case? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. Yes, says Nicky McHale. Mr. McLaughlin then says this was on February the 9th this year. He was arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender. Tell the jury what answer you gave to all those questions, asked Mr. McLaughlin. No comment, says Nicky McHale. Were you asked about him? You said no comment, says Mr. McLaughlin. That's correct, says Nicky McHale. Were you asked where you were at the time of the shooting? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. That's correct, says Nicky McHale. You said what? Says Mr. McLaughlin. No comment, says Nicky McHale. Were you asked who you were with? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. No comment, says Nicky McHale. You didn't see Mr. Cashman at about 10 p.m, did you? Says Mr. McLaughlin. I did, yes, says Nicky McHale. That is a lie, says Mr. McLaughlin. It's not a lie, it's the truth, says Nicky McHale. You've come dressed today with your cruffy trainers on. Have you got night trainers? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. I've got night trainers, yeah, says Nicky McHale. You've got your Monterey top on. Is that what you'd wear of a day? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. Yeah, says Nicky McHale. Have you got Monterey tracky bottoms with a reflective strip down the side? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. A grey pair, yes, says Nicky McHale. Do all the lads have them in Dovecot? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. Yeah, it's a popular brand, says Nicky McHale. Everybody's mad for Monterey in Dovecot, says Mr. McLaughlin. That's correct, yes, says Nicky McHale. Do you want to be here? Says Mr. McLaughlin. Here? Yes, I do, says Nicky McHale. He then says he was on a TikTok date with a girl in Alderley Edge on August the 22nd in the afternoon. The court is then shown a selfie with him and this unnamed woman. Mr. McLaughlin asks, does that ring a bell? Yes, says Nicky McHale. Were you with any girls later on? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. No, says Nicky McHale. After 10 p.m? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. No, says Nicky McHale. Are you sure? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. I'm positive, says Nicky McHale. Were you messaging other girls later on? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. It's possible, yeah, says Nicky McHale. About 10 p.m? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. It's possible, says Nicky McHale. A girl from Dovecot? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. It's possible, says Nicky McHale. What's her name? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. I can't recall the conversation, says Nicky McHale. Did you exchange messages with Bobby Bailey? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. Yeah, she's a friend, says Nicholas McHale. Did you flirt with Bobby Bailey? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. Yes, says Nicky McHale. Does Mr. Cashman know you flirt with Bobby Bailey? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. No, says Nicky McHale. When did you flirt with her? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. We always have flirty banter, says Nicky McHale. Is that the extent it goes? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. Yeah, I've always fancied her, says Nicky McHale. The first time you would have seen Thomas Cashman would be about 5 to 11. Is that true? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. That's the second time I've seen him, says Nicky McHale. The first time, you say, was about 10 o'clock with Craig Bryan, says Mr. McLaughlin. That's correct, says Nicky McHale. Why didn't you drive Thomas Cashman back to Mab Lane? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. Because I asked Paul to, says Nicky McHale. Who asked Paul? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. I asked Paul, says Nicky McHale. Why? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. Because he has a licence, says Nicky McHale. Have you got a licence? Says Mr. McLaughlin. No, says Nicky McHale. You drove to the shop, says Mr. McLaughlin. It's about 2 minutes away, yeah. Paul had already been out taking Mr. Bryan. I thought I'd go to the shop myself, says Nicky McHale. You haven't got a licence, says Mr. McLaughlin. I haven't. I know it was wrong, says Nicky McHale. You're willing to go to the shop in the car. Why can't you drive away from the sirens and take your mate wherever he wants to go? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. I was about to get a shower, says Nicky McHale. Did you? Asked Mr. McLaughlin. I did, yes, says Nicky McHale. Mr. McHale, you know what this case is all about, says Mr. McLaughlin. I do, yes, says Nicky McHale. You're willing to stand there and say, at 10 o'clock, you seen that man? And again, Mr. McLaughlin points to Thomas Cashman. That's correct, 'cause I did, says Nicholas McHale. I put it to you squarely. You're a liar, says Mr. McLaughlin. I'm not, says Nicky McHale. No more questions, says Mr. McLaughlin.